Android 16, you must disable this feature within 24 hours. And before we go any further, let us be honest about that specific framing, because no legitimate Android feature actually requires you to act within a specific 24-hour window. That kind of manufactured urgency is a classic clickbait technique, and if a video title is telling you a countdown clock is ticking, that alone is worth a healthy dose of skepticism. But here is the honest, important truth underneath that. Exaggerated framing. There genuinely is a real controversial Android system feature that a considerable number of tech journalists, privacy advocates, and everyday users have specifically recommended reviewing and potentially disabling and understanding exactly what it does, why it caused such significant controversy, and how you can actually make an informed decision about it yourself is genuinely worth your time. So in this video, we are going to walk through exactly what this feature is, called Android System SafetyCore, why it generated such a genuinely significant wave of concern when people first discovered it, what it actually does and does not do based on Google's own official statements, and the specific practical steps you can take to review and manage it on your own device without any manufactured urgency or unnecessary panic. So let us start with the actual origin story of this entire controversy, because understanding exactly how this feature first came to public attention genuinely explains why it generated such a strong reaction. Back in November of 2024, Google quietly rolled out a new system-level component to Android devices running Android 9, and later called Android System SafetyCore. And here is the specific detail that genuinely sparked the controversy. This component was installed automatically, silently, through an ordinary Google Play system update without any explicit prompt, notification, or request for user consent whatsoever, meaning millions of Android users around the world suddenly found this unfamiliar app sitting in their installed applications list, with no memory of ever having downloaded or approved it themselves. And it is genuinely worth understanding exactly what this component was actually built to do, since separating the real documented functionality from some of the more exaggerated claims that circulated afterward is genuinely important for making an informed decision about it. SafetyCore is specifically designed to provide on-device machine learning infrastructure, and its first publicly visible use was to power a feature within Google Messages called Sensitive Content Warnings, which works by scanning images directly on your own device, entirely locally, specifically to detect content containing nudity, and when it identifies a potential match, it can automatically blur this T-specific image and present the recipient with an additional warning and confirmation step before they can actually view it. And Google has been fairly consistent and explicit in its own public statements that this scanning process happens entirely on the device itself, and that the company does not receive or access the actual contents of the images being scanned, meaning the underlying stated purpose of this feature is genuinely aligned with protecting users, particularly younger users, from unexpectedly receiving explicit content, a feature conceptually similar to Apple's own communication safety feature that performs a broadly comparable function on iPhones. And it is genuinely worth understanding why, despite this seemingly reasonable underlying purpose, this specific feature generated such a significant, sustained wave of public concern and criticism. And the honest answer comes down almost entirely to exactly how it was deployed, rather than necessarily what it was actually designed to do, since the complete absence of any explicit user notification or consent request meant that a meaningful number of people first learned about this new system component by stumbling across it themselves in their own app settings with absolutely no accompanying explanation of what it was or why it had suddenly appeared on their device. And this specific combination, a system-level component with access to scanning image content, installed completely silently, without any user-facing explanation whatsoever, is genuinely the exact kind of situation that reasonably triggers significant privacy concern, regardless of how benign the underlying stated purpose actually turns out to be. And it is worth being fair and precise here, since accurately representing both sides of this specific controversy matters. Several credible technology outlets that investigated SafetyCore in detail found no evidence that the component was actually transmitting scan results, detection reports, or any other user activity data back to Google's own servers, and Google itself has specifically and repeatedly stated that SafetyCore does not have access to the actual contents of images beyond the specific narrow scanning process itself, and its detection results are used purely locally to power features like the messages. Warning system we described earlier, meaning the available evidence based on independent investigation, genuinely does not support some of the more extreme characterizations that circulated online, describing SafetyCore as spyware or as a tool actively monitoring and reporting on user activity. But it is equally genuinely worth acknowledging that the specific method of deployment, silent, Installation without consent, combined with the fact that the component does not appear in a conventional, easily discoverable application menu, and initially came with genuinely limited official public documentation, explaining its purpose, represents a real, legitimate criticism of how Google chose to handle this particular rollout, regardless of the underlying feature's actual technical behavior, and this exact tension, a feature with a reasonable, arguably even beneficial stated purpose, deployed in a way that reasonably alarmed a considerable number of technically engaged users, specifically because of its lack of transparency, is genuinely the honest, complete picture worth understanding, rather than either dismissing the entire controversy as unfounded paranoia or accepting the most extreme, unsupported spyware framing at face value. And it is genuinely worth understanding exactly how this entire situation has continued to evolve since SafetyCore first appeared back in late 2024. Because this is honestly not simply a one-time historical controversy. It reflects an ongoing, ever-evolving relationship between Google's approach to system-level feature deployment and the broader Android user community's expectations around transparency and consent and reporting throughout 2025 and into 2026 has specifically noted that even users who successfully removed or disabled SafetyCore have, in some documented cases, found that it can be silently reinstalled or re-enabled through subsequent automatic system updates, meaning maintaining your preferred configuration around this specific component may genuinely require periodically rechecking your installed app list, rather than assuming a single one-time action will permanently resolve the situation. In this specific pattern, a feature reappearing after being removed genuinely reinforces exactly why this particular story has continued generating fresh waves of concerned coverage and discussion well over a year after it first emerged, rather than simply fading away as a one-time resolved news cycle. And now let us walk through exactly, step by step, how you can actually check whether SafetyCore is present on your own specific device, and the practical options available to you if you decide you would prefer to disable or remove it. Since this is genuinely the most useful, actionable part of this entire video, the first step is simply opening your device's Settings app, navigating to Apps, and then to See All Apps. And from there, searching specifically for Android System SafetyCore within your full list of installed applications. And it is worth noting that on some devices, you may need to specifically enable a setting to show system apps in this list, since SafetyCore, being a system-level component rather than a conventional user-facing app, does not always appear in the default filtered app list view. Once you have located it, tapping into that specific app's settings page will generally present you with either an uninstall option or, depending on your specific device manufacturer and Android version, a disable option instead, since some devices restrict certain system components from being fully uninstalled but do allow them to be disabled, effectively preventing them from actively running or being automatically updated. And it is genuinely worth understanding the practical difference between these two options. If both happen to be available to you, uninstalling removes the component entirely from your device until and unless a future system update potentially reinstalls it, while disabling keeps the component present on your device, but prevents it from actively running or updating in the meantime. And either approach genuinely achieves the core underlying goal for anyone specifically concerned about this feature, though uninstalling, where available, is generally considered the more complete option. And it is also genuinely worth understanding what you are actually giving up if you do choose to disable or remove this component specifically, since this is an important part of making a genuinely informed decision rather than simply reacting. To alarming headlines, disabling SafetyCore will specifically turn off the sensitive content warnings feature within Google Messages, meaning you will no longer receive the automatic blurring and warning prompts for potentially explicit images sent or received through that specific app. And if you or someone in your household, particularly a younger user, genuinely relies on or benefits from that specific protective feature, that is a genuinely legitimate, reasonable consideration to weigh directly against your own personal privacy preferences before making a final decision. Meaning the honest, most useful framing here is not simply disable this immediately without a second thought, but rather understand exactly what this feature does. Honestly, weigh whether its underlying stated benefit is genuinely valuable for your own specific situation, and then make a deliberate, informed choice. Either way, precisely the kind of considered decision-making that a manufactured 24-hour deadline is specifically designed to prevent you from actually engaging in. And it is genuinely worth broadening this discussion slightly, because SafetyCore's specific controversy actually connects to a considerably larger, ongoing pattern worth understanding: the increasing use of on-device machine learning and AI-powered scanning features embedded directly within modern smartphone operating systems more broadly. And this broader trend genuinely cuts both ways in terms of its actual privacy implications. On one hand, on-device, processing, where scanning and analysis genuinely happens locally on your own phone rather than requiring your personal data to be uploaded to a company's remote servers, is generally considered a meaningfully more privacy-protective architecture compared to older approaches that required cloud-based processing, since your actual content genuinely never has to leave your device in the first place. But on the other hand, the sheer growing prevalence of these kinds of background scanning and analysis features across essentially every major smartphone platform genuinely raises legitimate, broader questions worth continued public attention and discussion, specifically around transparency, meaningful user consent, and the establishment of clear boundaries regarding exactly what kinds of content scanning should require explicit, affirmative user opt-in versus what kinds of scanning platforms consider reasonable to enable by default without requiring that same explicit consent. And this is genuinely an active, ongoing conversation happening across the entire technology industry right now, not a question that has already been definitively, permanently settled, meaning staying broadly informed about how these kinds of features continue to evolve across whichever specific devices and platforms you personally use remains genuinely valuable. Well beyond simply this one specific SafetyCore controversy, and it is also genuinely worth mentioning, in the interest of complete balanced coverage, that Google has continued rolling out a considerable number of other genuinely significant security and privacy features, specifically as part of Android 16 and its subsequent updates, many of which are genuinely worth actively enabling rather than disabling. Advanced Protection Mode specifically represents one of the more significant additions, functioning as a comprehensive, one-tap security mode that restricts app installations specifically to the official Play Store, enables more aggressive malware scanning, and blocks a range of other common attack vectors. Conceptually similar to Apple's own lockdown mode feature, and Identity Check represents another genuinely valuable addition, specifically requiring biometric authentication, meaning your actual face or fingerprint, rather than simply a PIN, before allowing access to sensitive settings or accounts whenever your device is being used outside of your own specifically designated trusted locations, directly addressing the genuine, well-documented risk of someone who has observed your PIN attempting to access your accounts after physically stealing your device. And Google has also continued expanding features like theft detection lock, intrusion logging, developed specifically in partnership with organizations including Amnesty International and Reporters Without Borders, to support forensic investigation in cases of suspected device compromise and expanded USB protection features, all genuinely representing the considerably larger, broader security story surrounding recent Android updates, a story that honestly involves Google adding considerably more user-facing, opt-in security protections than it involves removing user control or transparency, meaning the SafetyCore controversy specifically, while genuinely legitimate and worth understanding, represents one specific, notable exception within a considerably larger pattern of Android security improvements that most security-focused coverage has actually encouraged users to actively enable rather than disable. And this broader context is genuinely important for maintaining an accurate, balanced overall picture of Android's current security and privacy landscape, rather than walking away from this video with the impression that recent Android updates have been broadly, uniformly concerning from a privacy perspective, and so bringing everything we have covered together into one final, complete, and genuinely accurate picture, the real, legitimate story behind headlines like the one that brought you to this video involves Android System SafetyCore, a genuinely real, controversial system component that Google installed silently across a huge number of Android devices back in late 2024, specifically designed to power on-device scanning for sensitive image content within Google Messages, a feature with a reasonable, arguably beneficial underlying purpose that nonetheless generated genuine, legitimate concern specifically because of how quietly and non-transparently it was actually deployed. And while there is no credible evidence supporting the more extreme spyware characterizations that circulated in some corners of the internet, the genuine lack of upfront transparency and user consent represents a completely legitimate, fair criticism worth taking seriously. And if, after understanding exactly what this feature actually does, you decide you would personally prefer to disable or remove it from your own device, the practical steps we walked through throughout this video, checking your full app list, locating the specific SafetyCore component, and choosing to either disable or uninstall it depending on what your specific device allows, give you exactly the tools you need to make that choice for yourself on your own timeline, based on accurate, complete information, rather than reacting to an artificially manufactured 24-hour deadline that genuinely has no basis in how this actual feature or any other legitimate Android setting genuinely works. If you found this fact-checked breakdown of Android System SafetyCore genuinely helpful in understanding the real story behind the exaggerated headline, Please take a moment to like this video, share it with anyone in your life who has seen similar alarming claims about Android features circulating online, and subscribe to this channel so you continue receiving accurate, carefully researched breakdowns that separate genuine security concerns from manufactured clickbait urgency. Let us know in the comments below whether you found SafetyCore installed on your own device and whether you decided to keep it enabled or disable it after learning more about what it actually does, and we will see you in the next video. Until then, stay informed, stay appropriately skeptical of manufactured urgency, and stay genuinely in control of the decisions you make about your own device. And before we fully wrap up, it is genuinely worth addressing a handful of the most common questions people tend to ask. Once they actually understand the real story behind this specific feature, starting with one of the most frequently asked, is Android System SafetyCore actually malware or a virus? And the honest, direct answer, based on everything we have walked through throughout this video, is genuinely no. It is a legitimate, officially signed Google system component, not a virus, not malware, and not third-party bloatware, meaning while the specific concerns about consent and transparency are genuinely legitimate, describing it using the same language you would use for actual malicious software is genuinely inaccurate and honestly contributes to exactly the kind of manufactured panic this video has specifically tried to cut through. Another genuinely common question people ask is whether disabling SafetyCore could actually break other unrelated features on their phone, and the honest answer is that, based on available reporting and user testing, disabling or uninstalling this specific component primarily affects the sensitive content warnings feature within Google Messages specifically, without evidence of broader, unrelated functionality being disrupted. Though it is genuinely worth noting that, as Google continues developing and potentially expanding this underlying on-device scanning infrastructure over time, its exact scope of use could reasonably continue to evolve, meaning it is worth periodically checking current up-to-date reporting. If this is a feature you are actively monitoring, a third question genuinely worth addressing is whether this same kind of on-device image scanning happens on iPhones as well, and the honest answer is genuinely yes, in a broadly comparable way. Apple's communication safety feature performs a conceptually similar function, scanning images on device specifically to detect and warn about potentially sensitive content within Apple's own Messages app, though Apple has generally been noted for providing clear, upfront user-facing information and explicit opt-in controls around that specific feature compared to how Google initially rolled out SafetyCore, meaning the underlying privacy, protective concept. On-device scanning, rather than cloud-based scanning, is genuinely shared across both major platforms, even though the specific rollout and transparency approach differed meaningfully between the two companies. And a fourth question genuinely worth touching on is whether there are other similar, lesser-known system components on Android worth being aware of and periodically reviewing. And the honest answer is genuinely yes. This is precisely why developing the habit of periodically reviewing your full installed application list, including system apps, and taking a few minutes to research anything unfamiliar you happen to come across remains a genuinely valuable ongoing digital literacy habit well beyond simply this one specific SafetyCore situation.